and we're just about to enter the year of the Cup itself. What have we learnt from the Recon, and what does it tell us about the stories of the team's development arcs? Here are my top 6 favourite stories from the America's Cup Recon and why I think they are significant to how the teams will fare. Starting at number 6, I am going for the kind of coalescence of the design towards a T-foil-ish shape with a bit of a curve. I think after the last Cup, we all suspected the teams would go towards the foil that won the America's Cup for New Zealand. So it's not a huge surprise that the teams have moved in this direction. However, what the Recon has done is it's given us a little bit more depth to this story. And what we're seeing is a lot more of the very kind of granular detail of these foils. So not just the global shapes, which were easy to see in the last America's Cup because they were so different. But in this Cup, we're starting to see some of the kind of nuanced differences. So the surface textures, the fences, the wingtips, the use of the kind of like flexible areas within the rules. And I think what we're seeing now is the main differences are really about kind of the flap continuation across the back of the foil, whether that will be effectively a single piece flap or whether it will be split into two. And also looking at the intersection between the wing, the lifting surface, and the foil arm as it comes down to it. Now, it makes sense to separate those two kind of parts out, just so you kind of separate out the peak pressures as the water goes around those sections. And it's what we saw with Team New Zealand, but we're seeing a few of the teams stretch that point out and move the lifting surface way out. That's interesting, because the further away that flap is from the foil arm, the more you've got to do with the mechanics to get the control of that flap away from the foil arm. And that does increase a bit of risk with flutter as you get a little bit less purchase on that flap. So obviously the teams are working hard in that regard. Also moving up the foil arm, we're seeing quite a lot of development around the kind of the hammer or the elbow of the foil arm, these kind of like flanges sticking out. And it's still a bit of unknown exactly what's in there, whether it's ballast. So instead of putting ballast in the foil, which is further away from the boats, gives you more righty moment, but is in the water, which is 1,000 times denser, so that's volume you've got to displace. So moving it up into the air possibly is a good place to put ballast. But there could be hydrodynamics benefits to those flanges, and there could be an area to house actuation systems as well. So really interesting seeing the teams all play with that feature. Number 5, 3D jib sheeting. So this has been a bit of a surprise to me, actually. We knew all the teams were going to go to the self-tacking jib because that was a new thing that's allowed in this iteration of the AC75 class rules. But I didn't see there being so much development in these jib sheeting systems, and it's been really fascinating. One of the most obvious areas was Inos, because they have their jib sheeting system on the deck. It was shrouded in a casing, but over time we've seen that casing come off for all to see, and it's effectively a Carboni magic sheet system on rails, and that allows them to kind of adjust their sheeting point in completely 2 dimensions, which gives them effectively like a 3D sheeting when you add the sheet as the 3rd dimension. And other teams have played with this as well. American Magic have tried a simpler system with effectively 2 sheets. Seen Alingi recently have quite a nice system where they seem to have 2 sheets, but the kind of offset between the 2 sheets is played within the sheet on the foredeck, which is, I think that's what I'm seeing, and that seems to be quite a clever way of playing the 3D sheeting card. But Emirates Team New Zealand have come down in a similar way to Ineos, and I like this story because, well, I find the 3D sheeting interesting, but also it was Justin Mitchell who actually caught the shots of the Emirates Team New Zealand jib sheeting system up from on the heads outside Auckland, and just goes to show, despite all the very professional, amazing kind of recon footage and photos we get, it's still effectively a fan who's out there and has got us such an interesting bit of intel on the Kiwis design. Number 4, micro booms. The first boat I spotted this on was American Magic, but actually Alinghi beat them to it, and that is moving down the main sheet, these massive hydraulic rams which are the main sheet, so moving them down from sitting between the skins of the mainsail at the leech to flipping them 90 degrees and putting them kind of like down lower between the skins, extending forward towards a mast, where there's obviously a greater thickness between the two mainsail skins, so just more area to put these main sheet devices. And yeah, we saw Luna Rossa and American Magic do it first. We've seen a pretty interesting system from Alinghi, which I still can't figure out. And just before T6 disappeared from the face of this earth with more rudder problems, we actually saw another option on that system from Inos as well. So what we've not seen is the French team, and they've not really released any test equipment. I think they're just going with what they're getting from Team New Zealand as far as we know. But the only team not to really play massively around with the main sheeting system is Emirates Team New Zealand, and they were the team that pioneered the last system. So part of me thinks that they've got something up their sleeve for the launch of their new 75 that they've not felt the need to show on a test boat. Number 3, and the third best story, has been the weird foils. So I'm going to join these two stories up, and the two kind of out there foils, which goes against the kind of coalescence towards this T foil, is the W foil from Ineos and the Delta foil from Alinghi. And I think this has been, a great thing about the Recon, that we've actually caught these stories, and I don't think we would have if we were relying on camera phone images from fans. The W foil from Ineos, it was only on the boat for about a month, so read into that what you will. And I see what they're trying to do, create kind of like a balance, some of the positives of both a W foil and a T foil, but it didn't look great and didn't stay on the boat for long. Similarly, Alinghi's foil, their Delta foil, that has been on their boat, their test boat, for quite a long time. But what's interesting about it is a little bit more subtle. So the first headline grabbing bit was the tubercles, those kind of like bulges on the foil, which again, I just don't think unless you had a good camera you were going to pick up on those kind of subtle shaping of the foil. Would have been difficult anyway. And again, the back edge kind of delta, that is something that's quite hard to see. So what was unique about this foil was the back edge actually is swept backwards, but most of them are either flat across the back or even have a little bit of forward sweep in the trailing edge. Okay, story number 2, and I'm going for AC40 two-boat testing. So I'm conflicted about how I feel about the AC40s within this America's Cup. I'll be honest, I think the actual AC40 itself is a wicked boat, awesome boat, and I love the fact that we got to see it in its element in Jeddah and got some fantastic racing from it. And I think the performances of the French and the young Italians show that people, the women, the youth teams, are going to be able to get into these boats and be competitive and really demonstrate their skills without too much time in the boat, which is always a handicap for these kind of America's Cup kind of spin-off competitions. The downside and the story here, though, in terms of the Recon, has been the murky blurrings of lines between what is an AC40 and what's an LEQ12. So Luna Rossa and Ineos have both clearly built LEQ12 test boats, which are of their own manufacture, and splurged a lot of their test parts in one go. However, the subsequent teams which launched AC40s, and we expected all these to be kind of all these teams to convert one of these boats, where they'd bought two, into a test boat, an LEQ-12, and modify it. But what we've seen over time is that none of these boats have officially moved into an LEQ-12. They've all stayed as in-class AC-40s, with the main changes being sails and foils, but few changes to the actual structure of the hull, which has kept them technically in class. And this allows them to spread their quota of test parts across multiple boats. Is this good or bad for the competition? Well, it's certainly true that teams like Ineos, I don't think they realised that this would be possible, just reading between the lines in some of their press releases where the language around it suggests they didn't realise this was a thing. And interesting that this week Ineos have actually just bought, or just come into possession of at least, another AC-40 just as their T6 seemingly goes offline. So maybe they're looking to utilise this two-boat programme late in the cycle. They still have quite a lot of quota of mainsails, so potential for testing LEQ-12 mainsails across these two boats. But yeah, would things have been different? Would they have got their hands on a second AC-40 earlier if they'd realised this kind of creep in what could be classed a in-class AC-40? Okay, my number one story from the Recon programme, and it's something that I definitely don't think we would have got inside of if it wasn't for this the spy shots, and that is the Ineos tow mast. Now this mast was never used, but on the launch day, or actually before the launch day, there were photos that came up with the Recon of this mast-like structure that they were stepping onto the hull on the hard, and I speculated that in the launch video that it was a tow mast, and subsequently we saw a whole raft of rules queries from various teams about the legality of this mast and whether it counted as one of their test masts or whether it was an instrument to be used for testing the boat. The arguments went back and forth, but in the end Ineos never used this mast. Now this was a bit of a setback for their programme. They were due to do quite a lot of tow testing using this mast, and instead they couldn't. We'll never really know how much Ineos had got earmarked for that mast, but I think, judging by the amount of time it took them to get up and running with sails on that test boat, I think their programme took a bit of a hit. And I think it's also set up the story for Ineos's campaign so far, where they've had pretty interesting and out there ideas, but have often come a cropper with the implementation of it. Ineos do seem to have had this program where everything is just slightly different, and you can never quite work out whether it's genius, which is just faltering but ready to be amazing, or whether it's just a bit chaotic. So those are my top 6 stories from the Recon. I'm really looking forward to 2024, looking forward to the launch of the 75s, and we've still got a few more test foils on the LEQ-12s to come up, so I'll be looking out for those, assuming all the teams use their complete quota, and completing the story of the foil evolution in these test boats. That's it for me. Have a great Christmas. See you around.